Good morning, everyone. We are just waiting for at least one more member of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee to come to Committee Room 1. Then we will have quorum and we can proceed with our meeting today. So if there's anyone who is actually listening in their office, and I'm talking to Councillor Layton and perhaps Councillor Shelley Carroll, if you are here in the building, please join us, as well as our other citizen members. We welcome you to hurry to Committee Room 1 as soon as possible. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It seems to me that we now have quorum, thanks to Councillor Layton. So we should let him know that we're grateful that he's been able to join us. So welcome, everyone, to the 12th meeting of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. I'd like to begin our meeting and our proceedings by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. I would like to know if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, seeing none, can I have a mover to confirm the minutes of the meeting from September the 1st, 2016? Councillor Layton, thank you. Let us go ahead and review the agenda. Okay, so first item is we have the chair's report, which we will come back to very shortly. I will hold that. Item number 2, inventory on the state of accessible recreation. We will hold that because we have a staff presentation. Item number 3, accessible communication at meetings. We are also going to hold that because there are speakers. Item number 4, bylaws and policies for encroachments onto the right-of-way. I'm going to hold that for Stephanie because I know that was an item of interest to her, and it was a letter that she had submitted to the committee. Item number 5, which is the accessible bus routes item, we are going to hold that because we have a speaker on the item. And item number 6, Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Working Group. I anticipate that we're going to have some healthy discussion, so I know that I will hold that as well for the committee. Okay, so proceeding to item number 1, which is the chair's report. I wanted to just share with the committee members that we've had a number of communications on email and offline. And it's very important for us to follow the protocols and procedures of the open meetings bylaws. So what I want to ensure that we do is to convey to the members of the committee that staff are available to provide assistance, including the clerk, for any matters that you want to introduce as items. And I'm making this as a part of the chair's report, simply to provide clarity on how to move items onto the agenda, how to make the introductions, and then how we can proceed to help you bring the issues into the public forum, which is here, the open meeting process, so we can have a healthy and open debate and discussion about that before we take any actions or perhaps make recommendations to the executive committee and then on to city council. So this is something that is very important. It's been brought to my attention that it is absolutely crucial that we try to do the best that we can to ensure that all our discussions are open and in the public should we have meetings. And meetings online oftentimes are very convenient for those of us who live and work and are extremely busy, and trying to get everyone into one room is very difficult. But this is exactly why we have the advisory committee, which means that we can't make any decisions over email communications because that represents a closed meeting, and that is not permitted. Okay. So hopefully that provides some clarity, is that if you have an item or a topic of interest that you wish to advance onto the committee agenda, what we want to do is number 1 is to identify what it is and do some research so you can populate and build your case. Let myself, Nicole know, or perhaps any of the city staff and the clerk know that this is what you want to do. Then they'll work with you to create a letter of recommendation and to make sure that we are following all processes. And then we would review the level of appropriateness as it pertains to this committee, and then we'll introduce it as a committee onto the agenda. And there is no deviation from that order. That is how we need to advance new business at this committee. Okay, so, and then moving on to number 2, it's been brought to my attention.
Just have a motion to receive it.
Oh, I'm not quite finished. I'm sorry. That's okay. The second part of my report is specifically to talk about there's been some discussion with members of the newcomers committee as well as the poverty reduction strategy folks, as well as the seniors committee, about the pending budget process. There is, as you know, a council direction to reduce the 2017 budget across all divisions by 2.6%. And there are those committees who are representing vulnerable, marginalized communities that are looking for supports. So I'll be introducing a letter closer to the end of the agenda. My staff are just reviewing the language, but we would like to, and I would like to, as chair, ask for the committee's support to in particular, to follow the recommendations of the other committees, so we can also take a similar position and we can have some open discussion about that once the language of the letter and the motion is prepared. So you recognize that I just did exactly what we had to do, which is to follow that process. So that's the conclusion of my chair's report. And if I can have a motion to receive. Okay. Thank you, Martin. Okay, so heading over to item number 2. We are ready to receive a presentation from staff from Howie Dayton, Director of Community Recreation, Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. And this is a presentation on the inventory and the state of accessible recreation program. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And through the chair, I'm really pleased to be able to present to you today, and also take a moment to introduce Sharon Butler, the Acting Manager of Youth and Community Development. Unfortunately, bring regrets from Lorraine Bodium, who's our advocate for people with disabilities. She had a medical issue this morning, but I know she was hoping to be here, and she's certainly done a lot of work that I'll be speaking about today. So just in terms of background, on April 20th, 2015, Community Development and Recreation Committee requested that Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division report back on the state of accessible recreation, including opportunities to improve programming, ways to improve outreach, opportunities to add website links to the Fund Guide, which is our information guide on recreation programs and facilities, and progress that we've made on a service plan that was undertaken a few years ago called Getting Services Right. And I'll explain a little more about that shortly. So we're also going to have hopefully an opportunity to dialogue at the end of the presentation with any questions you may have. Today's presentation is really to provide this committee with an update on public accessible recreation, progress made, and upcoming initiatives. The presentation will also contribute to how we continue to deliver high-quality recreation programs without compromising the dignity and independence of persons with disability. It's also important to note that this goal in terms of accessible recreation is a priority within the 2013 to 2017 Council-approved Recreation Service Plan, which outlines the strategic directions of PFNR and identifies inclusion and accessible access as 2 of the 4 guiding principles in its development. So before getting into the programs and services, I thought I would share a little bit about the policy frameworks which guide our work, which you would probably have an interest in. The first is the Accessible Customer Service Policy. As part of the AODA Customer Service Standard Compliance, PFNR is required to outline divisional policies for customer service. And we have accomplished this through development of this specific divisional policy, provided a staff guide and a public guide, and do engage in staff training. Divisional accessibility plan. PFNR does have an accessibility plan, which is helping us ensure we are compliant with all current and future accessibility-related policies, regulation, codes, etc. There are 4 sections to this plan: assets, customer service, information and communication, and governance. And there are 2 key advisory groups representing the disability community who help us in the development and monitoring of this plan's implementation: PFNR's Community Disability Steering Committee and the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and we thank any volunteers who are participating on it. Third is the Office of the Advocate for People with Disability. Their role includes overall centralized support for overall centralized role for support and advice when handling any AODA compliance issue. They help us with ongoing issues that the public, staff, and participants may raise with respect to our programs and service delivery, and they do work closely with this committee as well as other in terms of bringing recommendations forward. Support and inclusion policy governs the adopted recreation and integrated support services offered by Community Recreation. It was originally published in 2000 and is currently in progress of being updated. And finally, Getting Services Right, which is a service plan that guides programs and operating plans within the division. So in terms of our service delivery model, the slide identifies 8 service areas. So I'm just going to quickly highlight what they are. Under what we call the programs and services umbrella, we have 3 areas: adapted recreation programs, integrated services, and staff training. Under supplementary supports, we have adaptive equipment, accommodating services, information and communications, and under public engagement, we have partnerships and community engagement. And these are areas that guide our service delivery, service planning, policy, and resource allocation. So let's start on how we deliver services. Integration services, as we call it, is really the support provided to enable participants to take part in typical recreation programs by offering what we call transitional support. Staff in our integration services unit work closely with participants and promote socialization. They help program instructors modify activities, instruction, and identify what types of adapted equipment we may need to ensure a successful program experience. Last year, we had a total of 704 program registrants receiving integration support in, just a small correction, 9 different program streams. And the pie chart on the slide shows the breakdown of program areas that these 704 persons registered for. Just in terms of our seasonality, recreation is offered year-round, and we provide integration support year-round, whether it's summer camps, fall programs, et cetera, et cetera. To engage or to participate, we have an intake process where staff would meet with caregivers, participants, school teachers, and confidentially collect information that help match participants with the best suited support staff and program and ensure the necessary accommodations are made in advance of the first day of program. We are currently reviewing that intake process and exploring ways to streamline it, make it simpler, and automate where we can. There is a limit on integrated services that are available to persons with a disability, and that ensures that we can maximize our service provision to as many different individuals as possible. For the fall, winter, and spring sessions, participants are able to request support for 1 program per session, and in the summer, individuals can receive up to 2 weeks of integration support per person, generally in our summer camps. The next grouping of programs we'll call is adapted recreation programs. So these are really specialized programs for individuals who have a special need and/or a disability and want to participate in community recreation with others who may have a similar interest, ability, and need. Some examples include wheelchair basketball, goalball, social clubs, which are typically for adults who may have a developmental intellectual disability. Activities are planned in the social clubs by members themselves and may include things like sports, bingo, musicals, cooking, movies, etc. Adapted summer camps are generally for youth, but also for adults with disabilities aged 13 to 29. Participants learn new skills through recreation activities such as cooking, swimming, games, arts. They take trips and have special guests. These camps have a lower staff to participant ratio than non-adapted summer camps, and the ratios are determined based on the needs and functionality of the members of the participants present. In 2015, we had 519 programs offered in 8 different program streams. This pie chart shows you the percentage of participation in each of those program streams, and as is typical for us, swimming and summer camps is the highest number of registrations that folks want to participate in. So we've been observing the trends over the last 3 years. There's been a steady increase in the request for adapted recreation programs. 17% increase from 2013 to 15, going from 413 to 519 programs being offered. And mainly this is a result of additional requests for more specialized swimming programs and summer camps for persons who are no longer within the age bracket of our general summer camp programming. In terms of participation, that translates into 3,345 registrations in all of our adapted recreation programs. And again, pie chart on the screen shows the percentage breakdown, with summer camps and swimming continuing to be the highest. There are some wait lists, I will say. I know people generally ask about wait lists, as is in our non-adapted programming. Most of our programming is oversubscribed, as is our adapted programming. So how do we make sure all of these experiences are successful? As you know, we have a lot of part-time staff who deliver a lot of recreation programs. So training is a big part of what we do, and we provide significant staff training and support, both for those staff who would be working in adapted or integrated programming, as well as for staff who may not, just to ensure that there's an equitable level of awareness and knowledge. And so we provide a number of topic-based training sessions for staff. These include things like aquatics and epilepsy, crisis management, self and personal care, behavior management. And these types of training are generally delivered by agencies that have expertise that we leverage, such as Epilepsy Society, Surrey's Place Centre, Community Living. And these are excellent partners and fantastic resources. We have 5 full-time staff across the city, as well as Lorraine's position, that provide oversight and advice to the part-time staff that deliver adopted programs and integrated services. And these staff are essential in ensuring that our part-time staff are trained, but also that we're providing a level of in-field support during the program seasons. I mentioned earlier equipment, and certainly another priority is to ensure that we have the types of equipment that folks need to successfully participate in sport and community recreation. The slide shows a number of pictures related to the types of equipment that we invest in, such as skate horses and sledges if you're doing ice-based activities, accessible fitness equipment that recognize some mobility limitations within our fitness centers, pool lifts, transfer lifts, braille printers, American Sign Language interpreters are some of the equipment and services that we have used over the years. One of our fitness centers, in fact, the St. Lawrence Community Recreation Center, has been identified as a pilot site to really invest in a number of adapted pieces of equipment, primarily because the catchment surrounding St. Lawrence Community Center have a higher proportion of that population identifies as having mobility limitations requiring that type of equipment. And we're looking at how successful that experience is and whether we can use those equipment in other facilities. As opportunity arises for facility redevelopments, we are looking at ways to ensure that we integrate, more infrastructure such as warm water pools. So the Regent Park Aquatic Center has a warm water pool with shallow depth entry that allows for us to do the types of programming that support muscular, circulatory, neurological impairments, and we want to look to these types of pools in future developments. We also have one snoozling room, or one of the few municipalities with a snoozling room, which is a multisensory environment, allowing individuals with disabilities to enjoy gentle stimulation of the primary senses, including visual, tactile, and auditory, as well as aromatherapy. That snoozling room is located in the Scarborough district, but we've also invested in 3 portable snoozling units that can be moved to various community centers as needed. PFNR also works with to ensure that any new facilities that are being repurposed, redeveloped, or new facilities designed are shared with the Divisional Accessibility Advisory Committee. So we want to ensure that as we design spaces, that we're considering not just the legislative needs, but also the lens of persons who may have needs with respect to mobility or visual, etc., are being considered in the way spaces are laid out. And that's been a very successful partnership and conversation on influencing our designs. Speaking of partnerships, we have a range of partnerships, and 12 different community agencies support community recreation with respect to training, programming, equipment, advice. I certainly want to pay and recognize those many fantastic resources we have in the community, such as Community Living Toronto, Geneva Center, Holland Beautiful Kids. There's many on this slide, so rather than going through them all, I'll just suggest that they provide us a number of supports and services to ensure that our programs are high quality and meeting the needs of those who are using them. Community engagement is certainly a priority within the Recreation Services Plan, and the Community Disability Steering Committee, which predates that, was actually established in 2003. It's comprised of resident volunteers that have a disability and or special need, and they represent a broad range of abilities and ages. The role of the citywide committee supports our accessibility plan, and we meet with them on a regular basis to bring forward policies, respond to issues, program initiatives, and their advice often influences service plans, financial priorities, and staff development opportunities. That committee is comprised of 10 to 14 members, and if there's an interest in being involved in it, we can get you Lorraine's contact information. One of the things that are of importance to us, and certainly we're going to be reporting back to CDR on, is how do people find out about what opportunities are available for them. So the accessibility webpage, we've been doing some work on revising it, but we do have an accessibility webpage on the PF&R website. It provides information on all of the programs and services as well as the facilities that I've been speaking to this morning. It also links to other branches within the city to ensure that sort of folks have as one-stop shop as we can possibly provide them online. I've mentioned the fund guide. In 2007, we undertook business transformation to standardize formatting and ensure that there's some recognition of adopted program titles and font sizes and those sorts of things, which changed as well in 2013. So we keep abreast of all of the legislative requirements in terms of communication, print media, and making sure that our fund guide is compliant. TTY lines are used to help communicate with the deaf and hard of hearing callers. There's one TT line per service district, although most of our correspondence we find that these days are through email, and we also do respond to requests for ASL interpreting. And finally, Braille. We do have a Braille printer that is used to support staff, volunteers, and public by providing content in Braille when needed. So we are working to continue to provide outreach, and if there are any suggestions, we're happy to take them. But certainly we're looking at strengthened partnerships with cultural and newcomer organizations and doing ongoing consultation with persons with disability to ensure that we're reaching out for those who may have a harder time finding information out about the programs and services and facilities available throughout the city. In terms of investments, in 2015, community recreation spent $33,191 on supplies, adaptive equipment, and special services. And then we also spent $956,900, I'll just round that off, on part-time staffing costs. And in addition to that, I mean, there's a number of, I would say, non-direct investments that we make through the types of programs, staff, and support we provide. But these are some of the direct costs that include the 5 full-time staff, the advocate for persons with disabilities that are really dedicated to these portfolios, and some of the direct programming that we provide. We also work hard to ensure affordability. So while many of the programs that we offer are free, we recognize some of the additional costs in addition to user fees where they are charged for any of the additional support some families may need to provide. But we also do leverage welcome policy and centers where programs are free, as well as some of our free drop-in programming to assist with some of those financial impacts. So what's on the horizon? Number of things that certainly we are working toward, that we are engaging with our advisory committees on. The big one you may have heard some about is the business transformation project, was the replacement of our class registration and permitting system. And so we want to ensure through that transformation, which is probably the most significant technology project that this division has undertaken since installing class 20-something years ago, that we seek the input to ensure that the fields and the functionality of the system support persons who may have a disability requiring a different way of entering our system and finding out information. We rolled out a new volunteer initiative in 2015, and we're really working hard on making sure that those folks who are volunteers understand some of the participants that may require some additional support, but also wanting to find ways of engaging persons with disability to become volunteers within our program. So that's work underway. A sport plan, facilities master plan are underway as well, which are service plans and a capital plan that's going to identify the capital plan, what our 20-year capital facility requirements are, both in parks and recreation. And we've been consulting with our Disability Advisory Committee to ensure that there is a lens of access on that plan. And same with their sport plan. It's how can we make sure that folks have an opportunity to be physically active and engaged in community programming through sport. And those are some of the highlights of things on the horizon, and that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howie, for the presentation. That was very thorough. I see hands shooting up in the air, so I'm going to start with Martin, Wendy, and then Yin.
I forgot about the microphone. Thank you for the presentation. I just, quick question, the website, do you have a direct website, or do you have to go through the City of Toronto and then go through a maze? Just curious.
PFNR, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, does have a homepage, and we can get you that link, absolutely. But there is a way under Living in Toronto that you can see recreation, and there's a number of drop-down menus that would provide you with access to whichever field you're interested in.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thank you for
Wendy, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Can you say a little bit more about how the current registration system is or is not accessible for people with disabilities? So for parents often with disabilities, I know that the system, and I know you know, the system is very difficult to use. And can you say a little bit more also about what the plans are in terms of making the new system accessible? So you've touched on it, you said we're going to do this, but can you talk about what kinds of plans might be in place for that?
In terms of the current system, I would say that it in and of itself doesn't have necessarily features that I would suggest would be assisting persons who may have visual impairments or hearing impairments. So those types of accommodations are made in a number of ways. Staff will reach out to, parents will reach out to us, and then we will assist them through the registration process. We also have a number of in-person registration sites, which again are not highly convenient when you prefer to use technology, that we do have families come to. And we provide some leisure counseling in advance of registration days that we assist with. I think the new system, it's early days really. We're just doing our business requirement gathering, but that's where we're engaging with our advisory committee in terms of some ideas that they have, and then we're including those within the business requirements as we go to procure that system. And if the system itself doesn't provide it, what are some of the add-ons that we might want to include in the system so that it accommodates the needs of our public.
Hi,
Please.
I'm Yin, and I also represent the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians. So it's very important for us to know in your training how much of it your staff and volunteers are being trained in assisting, leading, guiding, blind and low vision users, as well in the community organizations that you collaborate with. I hear, those serving developmental groups, but is there one assisting you with, accessibility for the blind and low vision? Because I think, oftentimes people with physical disabilities, they are the first people think of, but I really want to make sure, and you can tell me how, sight impaired and low vision people are being served equally well.
I might let Sharon jump in if there's a specific agency that she knows that is providing those specific trainings.
Our expertise that we've often used is Lorraine Bodium, as you indicated. So I know in terms of even the Disability Steering Committee, for the individuals that are blind and low vision, we often get feedback from them in terms of ways that we can improve our system. But CNIB, for example, those are places that we've touched base with in terms of working and assisting us. Often we have that integration support worker that has been trained, and so they are also assisting our children and youth and some adults, of course, that have visionary issues.
Can I follow up with a question or comment? Because most recently, when there was a piece of equipment being introduced and being tested, and I asked about how a blind person could operate that equipment, and Laureen had to say, sorry, it's not there, they're not there yet, but they're still going to buy that equipment. So I'm concerned, your gym equipment's just to say, how would a blind person who cannot do touch screen can even use it? So it's good. I do know you have, some people with sight impairment on your advisory group, but they're not the trainers. They're not the ones that's ensuring, equal access, so.
That's a fair comment, and part of today is really a dialogue, so that's feedback that I'm happy to take back into the operation and talk about that specific stream of training, that experience that you've had. Maybe we can dialogue offline and then certainly improve that so that if we're introducing equipment, there's a readiness for its use.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Morning. Thank you for the presentation. It raised four sort of areas of questioning I have. At the beginning, some of the numbers went by pretty quick, but I was wondering, you're talking about the demand for the adaptive services programs, whatever. I was wondering what the demand level is like relative to what you can accommodate, and what are the numbers in terms of those being turned away?
So we don't have the wait list numbers here. I mean, generally speaking, it's not the same as a recreation program that may have 10 spots and we have 15 kids waiting. What staff do try to do is work with the families and say, if it's you want week 1, but we may not have enough staff available for week 1, but maybe we could accommodate you week 3. And so I know that through the intake process, there's a lot of work done to get some level of service in for folks. It may not be as much as they want, but an area of measurement that we don't currently do would be to really quantify that demand. That's something that we're absolutely looking at, because if we're going to really be able to determine what additional service levels we might be able to look at down the road, that would be information that we would have to quantify differently.
Yeah, the question was really around, is your program so successful, there is so much demand out there that you can't keep up, and that, your program really needs to have a lot more funding and support to accommodate the need. So I was wondering, it's probably a good idea to collect those metrics.
Yeah, and the two areas that it's pretty common throughout our branch is swimming-based programs and summer camps. I mean, those two program streams are high demand. And difficult to find enough trained staff. Sometimes pool space is a limitation, and then funding becomes a limitation as well.
Okay, that was my next area of question. The spending, I wrote down a couple of notes. I was wondering, you have partners, and I was wondering how to what level do your partners contribute to delivering your services, and just how dependent are you on partners for either direct funding or services or facilities or anything?
We certainly do, rely on partners tremendously. We do quite a bit of services, particularly in the summertime, where some of the agencies will actually pay for our staff to be able to, because again of a lack of funds in certain areas. So we do rely on that partnership tremendously, and they provide also adaptive equipment. For instance, we're just working with Track 3 in terms of a memorandum of understanding that they provide ski opportunity and snowboarding opportunity activities for persons with a disability, and they provide all the equipment. And we lack that sort of infrastructure right now, so we really rely on that service being provided by partners.
Has anyone done an analysis on just what the numbers are in terms of how much money you actually are dependent on, and what sort of, costs of facilities and extent of facilities? Is there any sort of a metrics done there that, again, it would be another piece of information where you could say, we need more?
I mean, that's absolutely work that we could do with those agencies. The one other thing I'd mention, the value of working and leveraging those partnerships is that many of those partners are able to access funding that as a municipality we would never be able to access. So whether it's endowments, whether it's, as nonprofits receiving Trillium funding and those sorts of things. And they are looking for community-based investment. So this is not unique to the City of Toronto in terms of working collaboratively, leveraging external funding in terms of enhancing your service delivery. But I think it's a good point to be able to understand just what that level of support is from a financial perspective. So we're happy to work with our agencies to quantify that.
You mentioned something in passing, I think, earlier. You talked about user fees. So are there higher user fees for those wanting to leverage these adaptive services and programs? And do you see that in talking to potential registrants, that's a barrier to access and participation?
So user fees are, they're not different for persons with a disability to participate. They would be the user fee to participate in a program that has a fee. That fee is the same no matter whom the participant is. Some of our programs have fees, some are offered at no fee, and some centers have no fees at all attached to them. And so where fees are a barrier for anyone, there's a policy called the Welcome Policy in place, which anyone can access based on a financial income test, and that helps to address a financial barrier where one's been determined to exist.
Okay. And my last question was about the volunteers again, and it was mentioned earlier about volunteers, but I believe AOTA requires that all organizations ensure that their volunteers have the customer service standard training. So is that part of your operation as well, to ensure that?
Absolutely. We're doing basically an overall in terms of our volunteer system and registration of our volunteers so we can track them better. We're definitely improving that service, and that is a requirement. It's called an orientation technically because if it's a volunteer, can't use certain language. So that is a part of our orientation package that would be delivered to volunteers for sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Sorry, Joe, sorry. I was looking down. Rahima, and then Tom.
Is there a equestrian program? Horseback riding?
There is an equestrian program called CARD. So we work in partnership with them. I believe it's at G. Ross Lord Park in North York. And it provides some accessible horseback riding activities. So if you're looking for some more information on it, we can get that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima. Tom, to ask questions.
Thank you. I have two parts question. First one is on partnership again, and follow-up to Joe's question. Now that Joe has asked his questions about partnership, I've got a better understanding of what that means for you, because that was my question, what does partnership means? And the reason why I'm asking that is because looking at the list of partners you have, I'm surprised that you don't have any partnership with an organization such as Variety Village, where many people with disabilities congregate and access equipment and sport opportunities. So that's one. The other one is sport governing bodies, such as, for example, Ontario Cycling Association. They are becoming more and more involved with people with disabilities to promote cycling within that population as well. So can you comment on that?
Sure. I would say that we do work with, Variety Village in a number of different ways. It's not a comprehensive list. It's the slide is an example of some of the partnerships that exist, and sometimes the partnerships, is stronger based on sort of what the need of the day is, and sometimes it is, on the back burner. So I'm not sure exactly what we're doing with Variety Village today, but they're obviously an important contributor to both sport and recreation for persons with disabilities in the community. But one opportunity that we're working toward is with the sport plan specifically, there will be a component of the sport plan that speaks very much to our service delivery model for persons with disability in the area of sport and physical activity. And as part of that engagement, we'll be reaching out and holding some focus groups with the agencies that provide, facility-based or they have expertise in that area. So the two you mentioned are absolutely part of that conversation. We work with the provincial sport organizations in a number of ways. They don't provide direct service necessarily. They do provide expertise to a lot of the community sport groups that use our facilities. And so there are things that we are working with Ontario Cycling for sure. In fact, we've been working with them on the BMX track that just opened as part of Pan Am in Etobicoke, and then how we can leverage all of their knowledge, expertise, policy around, and then share that within our community sport organizations are going to be how this sport plan is developed and rolls out.
Great. And if anyone wanted to become a partner or at least promote their sport for people with disabilities through your group, is that possible?
I would say that we're building that opportunity. One of the vision is that we would have a website. We actually just launched a website called City of Sport that we can get the link for you, where we will be keeping the community abreast of all of the things happening with the sport plan. We have right now a request for people to share their sport stories and things of that nature. And if there's consultations going on, it'll list those dates. So that's the first piece I'd certainly recommend connecting to. And then as the sport plan moves out, we envision that this landing page would be an opportunity for all of our community sport organizations to promote themselves, have links directly to their websites. So we're looking at ways that we can cross-share with each other. The Fun Guide does have a listing of all community sport groups. So if you're not in there and you want to be in there and you meet the criteria, then absolutely you can at least have a listing there, which is a PDF document online as well.
Okay, and my second part of the question is, there are a number of events that are happening in Toronto which are not run by the city necessarily, but require the city permit to operate. And specifically, I'm thinking about things like the marathon runs, the Waterfront Marathon. There are 2 major marathons in Toronto and a couple of shorter ones as well. What are you doing to ensure that these events are fully integrated and welcome people with disabilities?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question because I'm not involved with those specific events, and the ones you mentioned aren't permits that PF&R necessarily issues. So that's something we can take back and ensure that that answer is given to you through the appropriate branch that has more responsibility for liaising with those events. We can also share if we do have any policy requirements on permits that we do issue. Offhand, I'm not sure what we would require with respect to third-party events that are using our facilities. There's some general policies that, such as our code of conduct, that folks have to use, and that speaks more about respect and if we have complaints, we will respond to those complaints, but we don't typically take a highly governing role for folks who are using facilities from a rental perspective.
I don't think it's actually articulates in the AODA that all events that you guys would approve in the city to be fully integrated, but it certainly is within the spirit of the legislation. And I think it's a responsibility of the license issuing body to ensure that the events are integrated, and they're not. And that has been something that we've been struggling with for a number of years now.
Understood. It's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge in terms of how much we can enforce with third-party events. So there's some requirements that folks have. We'll take back and see what they are specifically around accessibility but our ability to enforce how organizations that are third-party renting facilities operate their programs and services is a challenge.
Who in the city is responsible for approving events like that?
It depends on the event in terms of who approves it. You know, there's
the
a
marathon
special
run.
event in a park. I'm not sure who approves
No?
the marathon event. I don't have a relationship with the marathon event.
Okay. Sorry?
Final question? I let the time slip a little bit.
I'm good.
Okay. Any other questions? Howie, I have a couple of questions. With respect to equipment, so the capital infrastructure that PFR operates, the trail access into the ravines, into our natural public spaces, equipment on playgrounds, accommodations with respect to recreation facilities. What you described in terms of adaptive equipment, that's a very different thing than overall infrastructure. What's the backlog on the PFR assets on making sure that all equipment, all capital infrastructure is fully accessible?
So I don't have the dollar value on the backlog, but the process that we've undertaken is that we have an audit that has been completed through our capital group on all of our facilities. We have sort of categorized them in terms of which ones are considered not accessible, which ones are considered partially accessible, and which ones are considered fully accessible. And then as we try and move toward compliance with the AODA 2025 piece, it's the capital plan identifies projects and priorities. Obviously, where an opportunity comes in, because we're redeveloping a facility, we're going in and doing a major shutdown, we would look to incorporate accessible components where they lack. And then on the broader list of things like playground replacements, we have the playground replacement program. So we build in those opportunities within our long-range capital plan, but we'd have to get back to you with what the specific backlog is on accessibility features.
Has that been made public already? Is it sitting on the, is it sitting at the Parks, Forestry, Recreation Committee? Has that information been shown to anyone?
I don't know. We'd have to get back to you to see what has been reported out on with that. Mike Schreiner's shop.
Would it, can you give us an estimate in terms of percentages? 50% of the equipment in Toronto is not accessible, or?
I don't want to give a percentage.
Okay, so we can assume that information will be forthcoming to this committee. I think it's important overall. We recognize that you want to come into compliance by 2025, but if we don't know where we are today, it's going to be very difficult to find a path forward to meet that accessibility goal.
We can arrange for a presentation here specifically on our capital plan with respect to accessible infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. And it'd be great if you can make sure that it's included into the 2017 budget, especially since we have a budget process that's literally about to launch. My next question follows a little bit of what Tom was touching upon in terms of third-party activation. Especially from a recreation sports focus. So in 2017, we are going to be hosting as a city the Invictus Games and the North American Indigenous Games. And I think that the lesson learned from the 2015 Pan Am Games and Parapan Games is that we want to make sure that there's a public campaign and brand awareness around accessibility and the opportunity to promote inclusive sports. And so my question to you is, what is your committee, so what is your division doing to ensure that the Invictus Games and the North American Games will be the most fully accessible games from a viewer audience perspective, and perhaps even from a participant perspective?
we don't have a strong, the division itself doesn't have a strong, I don't want to say relationship, but because those games aren't necessarily using PF&R facilities, we're certainly part of the conversation with them, but it's not a direct facilitated event. I think my takeaway from the line of questioning is, you know, to have a conversation with ECD and Culture that does provide some more hands-on facilitated support for those, you know, sport tourism, sport hosting events around what policies we may want to look at. And certainly my takeaway as we roll out our you know, permit review and our own business transformation is what language might we want to include in some of those documents around requirements for accessibility. So I think that's something that I'm hearing is something we should look at. But I'm happy to have a conversation with ECD and Culture around those two major events coming in 2017 to find out what exactly they're doing around accessibility.
It would be helpful if you did, and if you can report back to this committee and just let us know the progress that comes out of that conversation. Thank you. No more questions, speakers to the item. Wendy.
I wanted to come back to registration a little bit. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm a parent with a disability. I don't happen to use any adaptive technology, but there are parents who do. And my concern is that, you know, you've said that people will get in touch with you directly and that there's some in-person stuff that happens around registering. And you sort of acknowledge that the current registration system doesn't really, it's not accessible. So my concern is that, you know, the revamp is critical. Clearly the revamp is really critical, and building accessibility into that revamp is going to be very tricky. What's happening in the interim that ensures that the program access for parents with disabilities who need to use that system to register is available? That's my real concern. So I don't quite understand whether it's clear to parents with disabilities who can't use that system that they should contact you, or how they do that. I don't know whether you track any of those numbers. I also don't know whether you sort of set aside spaces for parents with disabilities who might not be able to use that registration system. All of those things might be things that you would consider. You know, your long-term view of having your registration system be accessible is very, very important in terms of access to those programs being universal. The really tricky piece of that, I think, and this is something clearly that you're going to have to engage with your advisory committee on, is that the way that a lot of adaptive technology works is that sort of when you're refreshing a page, it becomes difficult for the adaptive technology to understand what's happening. And the way that I understand the registrations to work now is that everybody registers within a certain time period for limited spots. And so negotiating that context with what adaptive technology can do currently online is going to be very tricky. So, you know, I guess my suggestion is currently, with access to your programs being negotiated through an inaccessible system, I'd suggest that you think about how you redress that, and potentially it might need to be something that you hang on to after your revamp. So those are just my comments on registration.
Thank you for those.
Great. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay, so I'll just quickly move a motion to receive the presentation for information and just to offer a short remark. I recognize that there is a significant backlog. I know you weren't able to provide us the information of what is the capital backlog with respect to upgrading the equipment to make sure that we are fully ALDA compliant by 2025. I'm very nervous and cautiously optimistic that we may or may not meet those goals of the timeline simply because we don't know where we stand officially today. And the years are moving very quickly. And I have now learned that sometimes it takes 3 to 4 years to even build something as simple as a playground. In my own ward, the experience with Allen Gardens was almost a 4-year endeavor to lift that project off the ground, to renew the equipment. And that's just one simple little playground. So what I would urge the good folks at PFR to do is to really prioritize the equipment renewal. I think it's really important for us to expand the equipment as the replacement program rolls in. I think that there is probably a case to be made around human rights, is that as the City of Toronto, as we are a provider of services and high-quality services that must be accessible to all, I think that some of our equipment is actually failing our residents. So at the very least, I want to just put that on the table and urge you to take some action and to move it forward. I know there's good intention, and I recognize that the staff are quite burdened with the work plan that you have, especially in light of the fact that we've got a 2.6% budget cut that is being proposed. However, it would be a mistake for us to adopt that, especially knowing the capital backlog. The other thing is that when you have opportunities to promote brand awareness and to promote issues, we should capitalize on them. So the leveraging of the Invictus Games that is coming to Toronto, including the fact that the royal family is behind the games, and it's a game that's specifically focused on injured servicemen and women in uniforms, there's a real opportunity to make sure that whatever the Invictus Games is doing with their branding and promotion, and they're asking us to look at people as whole people and not just at their disabilities or their varied abilities, we should be a part of that message as the host city. And I would say that that's the same thing for the North American Indigenous Games, which I know that we have some peripheral conversations about, and although we are technically not hosting those events, I think it would be a mistake for us not to be a more active participant in those discussions and execution. So therefore, if there is any messaging that comes out, we're literally leveraging media and leveraging the publicity. So we bring about awareness on the issues because they're important to this committee, important to the city, the public service, and the public. And if we don't do that, then we actually do nothing but be consumers. So all we're doing is receiving and being entertained by the games, and there's no people legacy afterwards, which I think is just absolutely crucial, and it would be a missed opportunity. So just some thoughts. And with that, if I can have a vote to adopt the presentation, receive the presentation. Okay, thank you very much, so passed. Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 3, accessible communication at meetings. Yeah, oh, and we do have a speaker on the item. Our speaker is Miroslav Glavic. Welcome. When you're ready, you have 5 minutes.
My last name is pronounced Glavic, just a little accent, just so you know.
Thank you.
Carolyn. Hi. For the past 6 years, I've been coming to sorry, I'm supposed to. I feel weird. Okay. Normally you address the chair, you know. For the past 6 years, I've been coming to government management committee and executive, trying to make this building and the process accessible. Calling it torture would be not even close. There's, I don't want to say the city is lazy or something. It's just, maybe they don't want to do it. Change is hard in this building. I'm just stubborn. I'm going to be here until the process is 100% accessible, no matter how stressful. One of the things I've been trying to do is to get every committee meeting to be live streamed. Not everybody can make it here with things. I don't know if any of you live outside downtown. There's 4 community councils: Etobicoke, York, North York, and Scarborough. Only the meetings happening in this building get a live stream. It takes me 90 minutes to come from the east end of Scarborough. I am hard of hearing. I'm going to be losing my hearing a long time. There's so much stereotypes with people. I don't like even using disability because we're all human beings. I don't know sign language, ASL. I try to learn it. My brain just doesn't get it. I don't know if any of you have gone to the TTC's accessible meeting at the, what's it called, the Princess Gate, the whole CNE grounds, what are you gonna call it? They have somebody typing and sign language, you know? If any of you watch CNN or politics, whenever there's the state governors, one of the states, when they make an announcement, political announcement, there's always somebody there with sign language. Here, Canadian politicians, zero. You know, I've been trying to push at this committee meetings for somebody. A lot of this comes. I know how to read lips. That's my way of doing. Because sign language, I mean, don't get along together. That camera right there. That's 1, 2, somewhere 1 and 3. That could be filming me when if you see in Rogers that when there's that community council, they zoom up to the member of council, and my not so nice face could be projected on the screen for people that are hard of hearing like me. If I'm sitting behind here, I can't be reading the lips of anybody. There's no excuse. What's it called? Justin Trudeau, his reason for making half his minister woman said it's 2015. I say it's 2016. The reason why it should be 100% accessible. And if you can make it here, it should be adjusted. Another way to do it would be doing Skype deputations if you have a computer. Skype or whatever other product. Skype is just the most popular one. City's clerk's office and every department in the city said no. Councillor Ainsley, who's the chair of the Government Management Committee, has been trying to, he's also my councillor, has been trying to make all the meetings at the Etobicoke, York, North York, and Scarborough Community Councils, and any city meetings that happen there, or TTC meetings, or anything to do with the city, they're more accessible. City staff, certain city staff must be blocking it or don't want to do it. It's a constant struggle, and even though by 2025, excuse me, it should be fully accessible, this building is not going to be these meetings are not going to be 100% fully accessible for until 2025. Very few people come here and depute, and anytime you see anything on the executive or government management committee, please do come depute. It feels like I'm the only one that actually cares about accessibility. And it's very tiring, and thank you for having in this committee. There's no excuse, but sometimes it feels like the mayor, with all due respect, doesn't care. You know, he says, I look into it. That's a standard line that here, even at Queen's Park, at Parliament Hill, the same thing. We'll look into it. And
Miroslav, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a final sentence.
And it should be. You're right about this, you know?
Okay.
And you're doing a good job.
Thank you very much. Any questions to our speaker? No? Okay, thank you very much, Miroslav Glavich.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Terry Lynn, the letter is from yourself before us. Would you like to speak to it, or are there any questions about the content in the letter from the members of the committee? No? Okay, Terry, please speak to it.
Okay. I realize that it's very challenging for people with disabilities in particular to depute and participate in city meetings. And some things that we, or that I have been thinking about, has been things around sign language, as has been mentioned, but also...
Sorry, Terry Lynn, I don't mean to interrupt. I realize that you may have a motion that you want to move. Do you want to move that now, and then you can begin your remarks?
Oh,
It's on the screen for you now.
we can put the motion up. I feel like the motion can be changed.
The committee members will
Yes.
listen to you, and they can also make some suggestions if they
Yeah.
want to. But if you want to just explain and introduce your motion now?
Okay. The city manager and city clerk, as part of the continuous review of business improvement processes examine options to increase awareness of accessibility available for participation in public process, consultation, and committee meetings. My concern about this motion is that it doesn't seem strong enough. It just seems like potentially like a research process, and I think we can ask for more than that as a committee. I think that's really important. Can I move on from the motion? Can I just, okay.
Yes, please.
So, yeah, I do feel like this sounds a lot like it's speaking to research rather than things that the city can do to improve communication. But in terms of things like access to sign language at meetings, access to extra time, particularly for people who are AAC users, so use accessible alternative communication. I know folks, friends of mine have emailed me in particular to ask about how they would depute at a meeting and how they would ask for accessibility. And I think one of the things that the deputant highlighted as well is that we do have a process at the city where people can request accommodation. We need to get to a place where that accommodation already exists so that the individual requests don't have to be made, so that the meetings are designed to be universally accessible. There is also, I know I was speaking to Melissa and there was a deputant from Disability Access Accessible Communication, I feel like almost 2 years ago, and she was talking about the universal sign for AAC users, so accessible alternative communication users. And we could use more media and signage in terms of accessible communication to enhance that process as well. I did send the image to Melissa.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Terry Lynn. You concluded your remarks? Okay, thank you. Anybody else to speak to this matter? And I think Terry Lynn is requesting that if you want to strengthen her motion, she'd be welcoming. Joe?
The motion's gone.
Can we put the motion back on the screen, please?
The way the motion is written, if I'm getting it right, it's about increasing awareness in the public, in the advertisement of the fact that there is a public meeting, and that that participants and deputants will be given more time. Could we not, if it's just about, well, could we not get the city manager and the city clerk or to come back with options on how this could be strengthened in for advertisement of meetings? Does that help to strengthen and go in the direction that you're looking for?
Sorry, I believe that question is to Terry Lynn. Yeah. So at this point in time, so Terry Lynn has just placed a motion before us, so members of the committee can ask questions of the mover of the motion to clarify the motion. So do you have any questions of the mover of the motion? Because I asked that question the first time and your hands went up, so I'm assuming you would like to ask the mover questions to clarify the intention of the motion.
Well, I thought I did, but.
Okay, so is there a response from the mover?
I feel like, Joe, you were trying to clarify like the intention behind the motion. And I do think that there can be just some stronger wording in here that more pertains to actions. I'm open to suggestions.
So Wendy, before you ask the question, Rahima's hand was up next. Rahima, and then to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Terry Lynn. This is just a comment. I was a witness at a city council meeting, and there was a person with low vision who sat in an area where there was a TV monitor, and there's 2 downstairs. And they were asked to be moved from the seating area because that was only for city staff. So they moved their seat so they could hear the city council meeting but not view it. Thank you.
Very much, Rahima. That sounds like it was more of a statement. Wendy?
So Terry Lynn, if this motion was to be adjusted to read something more like suggesting that the city develop a policy on the provision of accessible communications for its business meetings, would that more accurately reflect what you think the intention is of the motion?
Yeah, I think, I feel like this motion has been evolving. I didn't write this one in particular, but I feel like the city has said that they already have accessible communications in place, but I want the motion to say something along the lines of like, the city has to have in place more concrete, accessible access to committee meetings, right? Not continually improve the process, and also have standards for those meetings that are made more accessible and more public to people. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Terry Lynn? Okay. Then what I'd like to do is move a slight amendment, and it's a friendly amendment, I believe, to perhaps give this well-intentioned motion a little bit more oomph, if that is such a thing. And that's simply to insert the words to accelerate and exam options. So I'll read it in its totality. So the city manager and city clerk, as part of their continuous review of business improvement processes, to accelerate and exam options, to increase awareness of accessibility available for the participation in public processes, consultations, and committee meetings. And so my understanding is that the city staff are already doing this work, and what is probably important for them to know is that they've taken note that this committee wants them to move faster and to move as comprehensively as possible to ensure that there is full accessibility in all the equipment and services to ensure that all the meetings are accessible. And because the work is already underway, what I'm asking this committee to do is simply move faster. And then they will come back and report to this committee when they are ready. Go ahead, please.
I'm just wondering, I understand that ASL interpretation is very expensive, but one of the things that I find, I don't quite understand why our committee in particular doesn't have ASL right on board. Things like that. And I also think the attention to accessible and alternative communication needs to be in the motion. Because right now, that's a huge miss at committee meetings.
Sorry, Terry Lynn, are you wanting to amend your motion then? Yes. Okay, so should we hold this item down until you collect all that you want to put into the motion, and then you can bring it back? I'm very uncomfortable about amending motions the way we have been at committee. One of the reasons I opened up my chair's report was simply to say, let's make sure that when we bring something to the committee that it's as fully developed as possible, because it's because it's actually very important for us to put forth a proposition that has the research and the historical background behind it. So we could stand this down for you, give you time to do what you like, and then we can bring the matter back to the committee, make a decision. Would you like that?
No, I would actually just like the motion to acknowledge accessible and alternative communication. This motion was presented to me today as the changed motion, so it wasn't, I have to be clear that I feel like it wasn't, my motion was a lot stronger before these changes were made.
So I'm getting some advice from the chair, from the staff to hold this matter down, and they will work with you and myself. I'm sorry I've been sliding in and out of my chair seat, is because there's just a few side conversations. I want to give this the full attention, but I find that this is a rather disjointed way of bringing about business. Not necessarily your fault, Terry Lynn. I understand that you've placed something else before us, and there are recommendations from staff to change that. So I will hold this down now, and let's move to our next item, but we're going to bring this back as soon as we're ready to reveal it again. We're okay? So let's do that then. Yeah, so just to clarify, we're only holding it down at this particular moment. It's not being bunted anywhere. We are going to bring it back today. We have time to do so, but I don't necessarily want to use our time at the committee to craft a motion that's on the fly, okay? So we're going to hold that, and hold that in my name. And moving on to item number 4, which is bylaws and policies for encroachments onto the right-of-way. And I recognize that this is a matter that was introduced by Stephanie, except for Stephanie is not here. But it does not matter, because are there any questions? Anybody like to speak to it? I recognize it's a letter with recommendations from a committee member, but staff may not be able to speak to it, but you have the option to do so. No? If there are no questions, what we can do is just move to adopt. If you've got no concerns about the content of the letter, the recommendation. Yes, Martin. Okay, so thank you very much. Martin moves to adopt the recommendation in the letter. And do we need to put the motion onto the screen, or does everyone have it before them? I think you already have it. You've read it, right? Okay, so Martin moves. All in favor, please show your support. Great, thank you very much. That item was moved and adopted. Okay, so moving on to number 5, accessible bus routes. We do have a speaker, and we welcome back Miroslav Glavic. You're welcome.
That program, the TTC, has to drop you off, not in bus stop, already started for years and years ago for women after 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. It grew to everybody. When I get home, the bus stop is on the near side. My house is on the side across the street. I have difficulties with stairs, if I could say that. I can't use the streetcar system except the new Spadina streetcar, even 4 steps. It's a horrible process for me. If this was you can hear me, okay? If this is the bus stop, it has a light, and it's mostly flattened out and no construction in it. But when the bus stop drops me off on the far side, in the suburbs we have the sidewalk and then the grass area and then the road. Sometimes the grass is not even and there's no light. on the far side, so people like me who have difficult walking can't see that there's a hole there or construction that, there's a lot of construction on my street that has a cone. So that program can be a bit difficult. It's much easier for me even to cross the street. Some sidewalks are like this instead of lowering down. In the suburbs, it's a complete horrible mess. They're making construction. A lot of those many of those in between stops, it's different downtown. Nothing against downtown. When you drop them off in between stops, there's usually no light. You don't know what's in front of you or if there's even a sidewalk. Downtown, you have a lot of sidewalks. That helps to move, and not every TTC route except that the older streetcars are accessible. I would say about 85% of the bus stops, especially in Scarborough and North York, the stop itself is not accessible. There's no excuse for that to happen. I always said TTC should, instead of expanding, it should maintain its systems and make every bus stop, streetcar accessible. They're doing on the St. Clair, they're doing on Spadina. But those are, with all due respect to downtown and Councillor Wong Tam, TTC does the popular routes in downtown Dufferin, King, and whatever, but there's a lot of routes and bus stops that should be fully accessible in Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough. 75% of the people in Toronto come from there, you know. I'm just giving you my experience and what it is. I am 36. There's a lot of stereotypes of people with disabilities. Apparently, because I'm young, I don't suffer from anything, and you don't see me with any assistance. I refuse to do it. You know, I want to access the system. Ooh, 4 minutes. But there's a mismatch on what the TTC does downtown, and certain routes that get covered more. Then I live in Scarborough, so I know this more, you know. And then what happens in Scarborough, I would say about 90% of the stops in Scarborough have zero accessibility, not even a light. The city is welcome to come to all the Scarborough. And look, I can tell you all the accessibility issues in Scarborough addressed.
Your final thought, and to wrap up?
Come visit and see 100% of the stops should be accessible.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Slav. Are there any questions of our deputant? No? Okay. So we have a letter before us. Are there any questions to the content of the letter, I guess? The letter is from Terry Lynn. I recognize that she's very busily trying to resolve the last item. Or are there any speakers to it? Anybody like to move to support it? I think it's pretty straightforward. Okay, Tom, is that your hands going up, I see? No? Okay. So what I'd like to do, did you happen to see my email yesterday that Matt is there to address or speak to some of the items? Sure, no, I didn't. So I've just been alerted that, and I should have acknowledged him, sorry, Matt, but Matt from TTC is here. If you have any questions for TTC staff, he is also here to provide any clarification and to answer any questions. Okay, so maybe I'll ask a question. Matt, just to have a better understanding, the letter with the recommendation as it's before us is to ask that you review the processes for classification and to make sure that whether the bus stops are, and the routes are accessible or inaccessible, is that you provide as many options as possible. Is this something that TTC can do?
Well, thanks for inviting me to speak on this. I guess we have a bit of good news in that we're receiving $10 million in funding from the Federal Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, and that's solely to make bus stops accessible. And that's over the next 2 years, I believe, all that money has to be spent. So right now, 83% of our bus stops are accessible out of 8,700. So that leaves about 1,400 that are not. But this $10 million in funding will be sufficient to make quite a few of those stops accessible where there's room beside the sidewalk, where right now there might be grass and we can just put a new concrete pad right beside it. So I think that will be a big step forward, especially in the suburban areas that the deputant just mentioned. We should be able to make a lot of those stops accessible just because the roads are so wide up there. And just some clarification on the letter. The letter mentioned City of Toronto Transportation Services, but it's actually TTC that determines whether a stop is accessible or not. And so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
So just as a follow-up question to just your last comment about TTC services, so should item number 1 be amended so that we request or that we only ask TTC to review the process for classification? Because I think the understanding was that when it comes to perhaps curb cuts, that the transportation services would need to be involved with that. Are you saying that the full decision-making is all in the hands of the TTC to the exclusion of transportation services?
So let me back up a second. TTC will declare a stop as accessible if there's sufficient room for the ramp to deploy off the bus and maneuvering room on the sidewalk. So generally that's at least 2.2 meters, or we try to go for 2.4 meters for new stops where there's lots of room available. And that is something that the TTC makes the decision on. But where we do need, say, adjacent infrastructure like curb ramps to get to the sidewalk in the first place, that would, yes, be the responsibility of the city to provide that infrastructure.
So then just to clarify, based on what you've just said, recommendation number 1 contained in the letter is then procedurally correct, that transportation services will have to be involved with the decision-making if it requires a sort of accessible ramp implementation.
I would say that generally the TTC would coordinate with transportation services when we require new infrastructure to get to the stop.
So then sorry, I think I just want to make sure that we are sending it off in the right direction. So would it be more accurate to then request the Toronto Transit Commission review the processes in consultation with general manager? Because is transportation services going to lead? Does this motion need to be amended? I'm just looking for some guidance here. Are you satisfied with the motion the way it's written?
I would suggest that it's the responsibility of TTC and not transportation services.
So we should, so therefore we should reorder it,
Yes.
correct? Okay, thank you very much. And I think the clerks will help us reorder that recommendation. Terry Lynn, sorry, I recognize that this is a matter that's very important to you. You introduced it to the committee. Do you have any questions of TTC staff that are here?
Sorry, Matt, I think I did hear some of what you were saying, but just for clarification, when I have talked to the TTC about this, they have said that it's also Public Works and Infrastructure that gets involved, and that you guys have to negotiate between you. Is that correct?
There's still some ongoing discussions about who is actually going to be constructing the improvements going forward, but the TTC is responsible for determining where the improvements will be made and which stops are becoming accessible next and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I think that's important for me to know.
Okay.
These are questions for the motion, right? Or to the...
These are questions to staff that are here to support you. Do you have any other questions, Terry Lynn? No? Okay, thank you. Tom? Sorry, Joe. Why am I doing this today? My apologies, Joe.
Hey, just, the conversation's a little confusing. So to clarify, if TTC designates a stop as accessible and requires a curb cut, transportation services could decide no, and then it doesn't become an accessible stop? Did I hear that correctly?
If I can just add to that.
Your, sure, your question is going to, I think, perhaps Lee Shurkin. Or is it
We
TTC?
can both chime in. Do you want to chime in first, Matt?
With respect to the issue of curb cuts, there's very, very few that would require a curb cut. The vast majority of the stops that are not accessible are because the sidewalk is not wide enough there, essentially. There are a few locations where curb cuts are required or where there isn't actually a sidewalk on the side of the street where the bus stop is. So in that situation, we definitely would consult with transportation services, and often they would do those as part of larger road reconstruction projects. We've done that recently on Middlefield Road in Scarborough, for example. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Lee.
And Lee, do you have anything to add?
Not especially. I would just add that the only thing there is a permit process, that the TTC gets a permit from us. It's really just an administrative thing, and the TTC manages the implementation of the pads on the grass, as Matt had said, and any of the infrastructure changes that are required for the bus stop, but it's not transportation services to prevent that.
Joe, do you have a follow-up question? No? Anyone else to ask questions? I have a slight amendment to adjust recommendation number 1. I think it gets you to exactly where you would like it to go, Terry Lynn. So what I would suggest is that we just delete the words "the general manager of transportation services," so we leave it in the hands of the TTC. There's an internal process, as we have now understood, that the TTC would have to take the lead. If they need to if they need any support and consultation, then they will just generally go to transportation, but it's not necessarily needed to have in the motion, but it just clarifies who takes the lead. And so with that, I think we have an amended series of recommendations in Terry Lynn's letter. So if you can show support and support this amendment.
I think there's one word that should be bus stops and not bus routes. Third line, bus routes, instead should be bus stops.
This one?
No, I think both of them then, because we're talking about making bus stops accessible. It doesn't necessarily, like an entire route might not be accessible.
So Nicole is suggesting that we actually take out the words bus route or bus routes and instead include the word bus stops. But I don't believe that was necessarily the intention of the motion. The intention of the motion was to look at the accessibility along the routes. Is that correct, Terry Lynn?
Because the issue is the bus routes are deemed to be accessible, whereas some of the bus stops are not. And the other thing too is, like Matt was sharing, and I think this is really important for people to know, that I'm gonna say the TTC, although I've heard that different departments are involved. The TTC has standards by which they think a bus stop is accessible. However, lots of the bus stops that don't necessarily have the same amount of space are actually accessible to the customer, but then are being refused to be dropped off based on this designation of bus stops, bus routes. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, what needs to happen is the designation of inaccessible bus stops and accessible ones needs to end. They just all need to be accessible.
All right, folks, we're again getting some advice here from clerk. Why don't we just do?
Stops last week.
Okay.
That we were covered.
Okay. So we're just going to make a quick amendment to make sure everyone make sure every single intention and sentiment is captured. We're going to add the words bus stop as well as routes. So I think we can all live with it. The intention of the motion is pretty clear. It's a very straightforward request. I recognize that we're spending some time finessing the language, but I think what's really important is that what Terry Lynn is asking for is specifically to make sure that all accessibility along the routes, along the stops, the entire system is going to be fully accessible. Okay, so that's going to be an amendment to the recommendation of the letter. If I can get all those in favor of the amendment, just show support. Okay, thank you very much. And then as the recommendations as amended, again, a show of support, please. Okay, so that's been adopted. Thank you very much. Okay. So then moving on to item number 6, I know that there's been lots of interest and discussion around this particular piece. So item number 6 is the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee Working Group, and we have a letter from Terry Lynn and Darren Cooper to make some changes. So are there any questions to staff right now, or would you like to just specifically go into questions of the mover? Or we can just go into adoption. Anyone to speak to the item? I suspect that members who move the motion might want to speak to their own motion. Yeah, you have to. Yes, someone will have to move it. So, yes. Can we move? Okay, yes, we'll put the entire item up.
So I think the one thing that folks do want to talk about is, I guess, which committees they want to be on. But these committees, myself and Darren felt that they really reflected the history of the committee and things that we had worked on in the past, and also what's required of the AODA, of AODA committees in general. So for example, transportation is part of AODA committees across Ontario. And the employment working group we had talked about at several previous committee meetings, the communications working group, and also the housing working group, and built environment. And some of these committees reflect the history of the committee, of the subcommittees in previous groups as well. But I'm open to, if people would like to discuss it, I'm open to that as well.
Okay, so this is a topic that's going to affect every single member of the committee, because we need to populate these working groups with working members. I have a request from Darren, which I'm going to move as a motion on perhaps on his behalf. He's not here today, but I'm assuming that the members were canvassed on the committees that they wanted to work on, and I'm assuming that this is a motion that everyone can adopt and support. And I see a hand going right up. Since I moved that motion, Martin, are you asking me questions about the motion? Okay, I'm going to try, even though it's not my motion. But.
Okay, no, it's just that throughout the process, it was done over email, which we have been told many times not to do. But anyways, my name was put into one of the subcommittees, and I had not stated that I wanted to be on that committee. So the process was just a bit off for me, so that's why I waited until today, and then I'll see where things go and then choose my subcommittee from there. So I guess this was just more of a statement. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, for the comment. And I realize that what I should probably do is just read the motion in its entirety, and you'll recognize that your name was removed as you had requested. So the motion that is before us is subject to the Executive Committee approval of the establishment of the working groups. The following membership be approved: Communications Working Group, Darren Cooper, Yin Brown, and Stephanie Osorio. Employment Working Group, Wendy Porch and Victoria Warner. Housing Working Group, Joe Napper and Terry Lynn Langdon. And Transportation Working Group, Terry Odell. If you don't have, Tracy Odell, thank you. If you're not necessarily a part of the working group, you have options to join. The membership of the working groups is by no means closed. If you'd like to put your name forward now to join one of these working groups, I'll be happy to take an amendment. Rahima.
Communications.
Communications Working Group, so Rahima. Yes, you will not have 6 people per committee. So far, the ranking of committee members per working group is either 1 person to a maximum of 4 persons. So the committee working groups cannot exceed 6 members at a time. Tom?
Employment and transportation.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Adding Tom's name to employment and transportation. Tracy is going to love your company because she's all alone right there right now. Are there any other members? You can also let us know afterwards. Okay. So the just as a reminder, and I know that the working groups have a duty to meet as they see fit to go about their business. And just like I have my chair's report that I deliver at the beginning of the meetings, I'm hoping that you allow me to know whether or not your working group has anything to report back at also the beginning of the meetings, and we roll it all together. This is very exciting. I'm very pleased that the working groups are being reconstituted. It looks to me like these are the right committees, and I certainly appreciate the fact that the members are very interested in keenly doing more work and advocacy in the different topics that have been identified. Okay. So Martin and Yin?
So if we wanted to join one of the subcommittees after further deliberation, who do we talk to? Do we send email to Nicole, or what do we do?
Yes, you can do that, and Nicole will pipe you in on the status of those committees. Recognize that there is no necessary ongoing staff support at those committees. Those committees are very much members driven. So I think that what we will need coming out of those working groups is a self-organization and selection of perhaps a designated lead or a chair of that working group, and that person will be tasked with the responsibility of reporting back and to liaison with other members for their active participation. So Martin, at any given time, you let us know what committee you are working group, what working group you're interested in joining, and I'm sure that your participation and leadership will be welcomed. Okay, Yin?
You probably answered one of my questions that I heard that staff should join every one of these groups. I mean, I think you just said it's not necessary.
I did not say that, no.
No, you didn't say, but somebody was saying that. Okay. The second thing is there was talk of non-committee members, if we need expertise, say, for example, at the communication group, I thought, hey, we don't have someone with a deaf person, so can we have non-committee members be part of our working group?
Can you use your microphone? I think Nicole would like to answer that question.
I believe the quick answer from clerks is no. And I believe that what we had discussed in the past, and maybe they could clarify, is that if we wanted to invite guests to bring information to a working group meeting, that guests could be invited. And I'm getting the nod that that's a yes.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
So if I do need a deaf person consulting, like just say get their input, and ASL or some kind of thing is needed, does the city provide sponsorship of the cost of that accommodation piece?
Who can answer that question?
Yes, the city would provide that. where the cost would be allocated would be an internal matter between clerks and the city manager's office.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So there's, Tom, please.
Just a question on a procedure of working groups. Are all our meetings in the working groups in camera, or do we have to go through the open process that this committee goes through to communicate?
Clerk is ready to answer that question.
The working groups are just a way of divvying up the work of the committee because the committee can't meet so often. The rules, because the working group cannot really make any decisions, it can't make any recommendations, can't make any decisions, it will report up to the disability, the committee itself. So you can't take any action. And it would be mainly advisory to the city manager, and so in that way you wouldn't go through the formal meeting process, which you're required to do with this committee in front.
But the committee members are free to meet whenever and wherever and however, right? And then they're recommended.
Committee members as members of the committee, or committee members as members of the working groups?
Sorry, members of the working group.
Yeah, but I would consult with the city manager's office as to the appropriate forum for that. Yeah, meeting, the whole point of meeting in open session is that so that the decision-making process is open, accessible and accountable. That's the principles behind that. The fact that these working groups can't really do anything except bring something to the committee, so they would be advising the city manager's office, so it's less stringent rules, because eventually it has to come, before you can really do anything, it has to come to this committee in full and open forum.
Terry Lynn, to ask questions?
If I may, the way the working groups worked before is that when you are meeting in your working groups, you have to take minutes and then publish those minutes and bring them back to the committee and do a report. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Well, it helps. I mean, I think it's important that we are all aware of the protocol of the working groups, because most of us are not employed by the city, so we're not aware of the processes here. As it was, some communications were going around about the working groups itself through emails, and now I'm told that wasn't appropriate. So I don't want to be in the same boat again when it comes to the working group meetings.
Thank you very much. I think staff have a comment.
Yeah, just to comment on how you would report up to the main, to the committee, this committee. Some of the working groups actually found it easier to take minutes and just report the minutes through. That was their report. However, the working group, if you decide that you want to have a chair or a person who's taking notes or whatever, then that's equally acceptable as how you're going to report. But everything that you do will be subject to the open and accessible meeting when you bring it to committee.
Okay. Great. I think there's probably, if there are no more amendments or no more speakers, Terry Lynn, you want to speak again?
Joe has his hand up.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
Well, actually, so let's just place the order before us. So there is a motion before you, and it's a motion that has now been amended to add a few more names to reflect the expression of interest from the members of the committee. At this point in time, would you like to speak to the motion, or do you have any questions of the mover of the motion? No. Okay. So no to the questions of the mover. Is that correct? Do you have any comments, any speeches to be made about the item in total?
I feel like I've already spoken to it, like not even just at this committee meeting, but at previous ones.
Okay, so that I take that as no, you
Yeah.
don't need to speak to this item again. Okay, great. So if we can, so the motion's placed, we can probably vote and to adopt and get to work. Okay, all in favor, please? Great, thank you very much. So adopted. Appreciate that. And thank you to everyone.
You have to adopt a motion to establish the working group.
Oh,
The original item.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry, we also have to adopt the original recommendations to establish the working groups and then to populate the working groups. So if I can have a vote for that as well? Okay, great, thank you very much. Thank you, Clerk, for catching that. Wonderful. I am going to ask the committee to allow me to introduce an item, and this is the same item that I spoke about in my chair's report. Once it's introduced, then I can have it circulated so everyone can take a read. And this is with respect to taking a position from this committee in response to the 2.6% budget cut that is now going through the divisions. Yeah, and so one, it will be circulated, and two, I'm going to read it aloud once we have a chance to address it. Okay, so motion to introduce. I will introduce it then. Okay, all those in favor of introduction of this new item. Thank you very much. So that will be circulated. Moving back to item number 3. We left off where Terry Lynn, you were in discussions with the clerks on how to change your motion. Is there a new motion to put on the screen now?
I hope so.
Okay, can we take a look at it? Okay, and Terry Lynn, I'll just give you a couple minutes to speak to this amended motion. Okay. Sure. I'm also going to read it out loud.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. So this is Terry Lynn's motion that the city increase the accessibility of public processes, consultations, and committee meetings by including communities using accessible alternative, okay, we got a spelling mistake, and visual languages as a way to communicate, and that such meetings progress to universal design for all people in the city of Toronto. Nicely done.
Yeah, so I feel the wording of this particular motion is stronger, and it also, I feel, recognizes the history of disability communities in political process. I'm wondering if people have feedback about it.
Yin?
Somewhere, audio description. Yeah, because you have the word visual, very useful, but I think a lot of times in presentations, the audio clearer or more descriptive, audio component is missing.
And so would it be appropriate to add language using accessible alternative, visual languages, including audio description, as a way to communicate? Would that be correct? Okay, so the clerk will make that amendment for you. And that, I think, is a very friendly amendment. Martin, did I see your hand go up to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if we should go too technical, and I like the generalization, because then it gives the group more leverage on what they can try. But I guess I'll accept audio description. I guess that's good.
Just to clarify, I don't mean like when I say audio, it could be even a verbal one. So it's not like a video audio description. That's what I mean, anyways.
Okay, Wendy.
Sorry, can we, is the motion being amended? Is that why it's not down? Okay. This is a general question, and I'm not sure who it should be addressed to. So what we're asking for in this motion is that they use accessible and alternative visual languages, including things like audio description, but that meetings progress to universal design for all people in the City of Toronto. So my question relates to the last part of the motion. What I'm trying to understand, and I'm not clear on this, is there a standard now for how accessible meetings should be? And how are the decisions made around whether or not a meeting actually has sign language? Because what I'm wondering is, if there is such a standard, then should we be asking for a broader implementation of that standard or an expansion of the standard as opposed to universal design? Universal design can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
That's a very good question. I think perhaps Nicole can provide some clarity.
So I guess the clarity that I can provide is that I have been working with a variety of people from clerk's office that are looking at the accessibility, the universal design or the universal accessibility when it comes to the committee meeting room spaces, the equipment, the podium, and as well as our processes. Other things that we've been looking into is how to provide captions and ASL. My preference is to have, I think what we're talking about when we speak about universal design is the idea that there are some basic levels of accessibility that are provided all the time, such as having cart services. And so these are things that we are working toward. In fact, these are things that many municipalities in the city are working toward right now. In fact, we're going to be participating in a meeting on Friday with the Ontario Network of Accessibility Professionals to learn how some of the other municipalities are addressing this. Obviously, our legal requirement is to provide accommodation upon request, but as Terry Lynn stated, the better goal and what we strive towards is to have a best practice so that we're not scrambling at the last moment trying to find an ASL interpreter, because the reality is that there are very few people available on 24 and 48 hours notice, and so it's easy to weigh the risks and challenges of not having those types of services readily available. So that these are things that we're going to be including as part of the multi-year accessibility plan so that we can build these in as part of the city becoming fully accessible by 2025. So that is an area that's of a very keen interest.
You want a follow-up question?
Yeah, just to clarify, so there is no standard currently. There's no minimum standard. It's applied for on request.
I believe that's correct, although I can't speak for the whole organization.
Can I make a follow-up comment?
You have time.
For discussion? So I wonder if I don't know, I don't want to sidetrack this, and I don't want to turn it into something that it's not, but I'm wondering about whether or not the motion should include something, either this motion or I'm up for discussion about whether this comes up later, perhaps through the communications working group. But to me, there should be the development of a minimum standard of how determinations are made around whether or not provisions like sign language are provided as a way of course and are not required to be triggered by a request. So I'm putting it out there whether or not, I can be swayed about not having it amended in terms of this motion, but it coming up for discussion at least at some point.
So,
Ms. Terry Lynn, is your microphone on?
yep, it is now, sorry. It can say, by including standards, communities using accessible, right? Or creating standards. Would that address it, Wendy? I think your point is very, very poignant.
I'm not sure actually how to amend this, but that's why I'm sort of wishy-washy on whether I would like to see this passed, but I would like to ask that we revisit it through the communications working group or through the committee as a whole, that we actually start to drill down to the development of a minimum standard. From what I heard from you, Nicole, is that you're investigating that possibility, and I would like to see us formalize some kind of a request that happen. Because of the case that was made here earlier today, that we see often in government that there's a presumed need for accessibility. So things like sign language interpretation are provided as a matter of course, particularly with large meetings, as opposed to relying on people with disabilities to come forward and say, I need that. So I think that we need to examine that angle.
And I would like just to respond to say that I'm agreeing with you in that I am obviously still in the stage of collecting more information about how the infrastructure works from city clerks, and at the same time, that is definitely the long-term goal, and that will be clearly defined through the multi-year accessibility plan, which we'll be consulting heavily with.
I see Tom's hand going up. Tom?
Yeah, in respect and acknowledgement of the work that Nicole is doing and the city is doing already to provide access, would it not work well to just leave that motion to say that all meetings will be moving towards full access based on universal design, and then request Nicole or someone from the clerk's office to come back and report to us how the progress is going forward? Would that not be the best way of doing it? So our group would end up being more of a watchdog, whether we're moving towards that, and how they're moving it, it's certainly up to the professionals to figure out what works best in that system.
I think in that statement was a question for Terry Lynn.
Okay, I personally like Wendy's idea of bringing the issue of standards back to the committee, creating a separate motion, because I feel like it's related and equally important, but needs equal attention. And also, I would say, like, I see our role on the committee as we definitely do watch some things. I don't know if we're like watchdogs. Like, I don't know if we want to, but we can use our skills here and on the forum here to create a separate motion, as Wendy's suggesting, at a future meeting. Does that?
I think, Terry Lynn, sorry, Martin, I see your hand. Before I bring you onto the floor to speak, I believe that Nicole would like to respond, or at least provide some information.
I just wanted to provide some follow-up on the process. So once something is documented in our multi-year accessibility plan, it also goes through an annual review and a status update. So you won't be the only one watching how things are progressing.
Yes, Martin.
Okay, I just wanted to point out something funny here. I just lived through an irony. I just received a piece of paper that I can't access during the same meeting that we're talking about accessibility. Nonetheless, to be fair, I will be receiving it in email, but this is, it's a good example of what can happen during a meeting when there's handouts and stuff. So, but luckily enough, I do have access to my email right now, so I'll be able to receive it. But I do receive a lot of printed material in other meetings, not just here, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, for pointing that out, and certainly that it's a very good highlight of how, even in this committee, we need to do a better job. So I believe we have a motion on the table, and is there a way for us to amend the motion for Terry Lynn and I think Wendy to capture some of the sentiments? Because
Sorry, if I could just suggest something, perhaps, that
yes,
the committee request that there be if you like, every 6 months, meeting update on the progress towards universal design and the establishment of minimum standards for meetings. Maybe that's the way that the city manager reports out every 6 months, biannually, on the progress that the city's making.
Yeah.
Would that?
Yes, I think it would be very helpful, and also with the request to develop minimum standards, which I now believe you are working on. So Janice is going to finesse the motion for you, Terry Lynn, to make sure it captures all of that. And while she does that, maybe what I'll do is just speak to it. I want to thank Terry Lynn for your tenacity. Certainly, I believe that you have shown us the very best of this committee and what it means to be an advocate. I recognize that you were not satisfied at all with the recommendation that you had first initially placed, and perhaps there was responses from the staff of wanting you to know that the work is being developed. Trust us is the tone of it, and I think it's perfectly appropriate for members of this committee that says, yes, we trust you, but we're still wanting to watch you, and that is the that is the exact and very specific and clear role of this committee, is to provide oversight, to provide advice, to work in partnership with the city. And this work is difficult. This work is ongoing. I think that having a system change is not something that's going to happen overnight, and yet we're working with people who don't have time and patience to do what you're doing today. So I want to thank you, Terry Lynn, for bringing this forward. Just as an example of how difficult it is to even access sometimes information at City Hall. So as a councillor who has a political position, who holds many public meetings, I'm out every night, almost 4 nights a week. Sometimes those are meetings that I initiate, and sometimes they're meetings that I have to attend at a request of the community. And in my 6 years of City Hall, I just found out that sign language interpretation is something that the clerk's office can provide us for support out of their budget. And for some reason, it was not made known to me. So for 6 years, we have been paying for it ourselves at the request of those who step forward and say, I need sign language interpretation. And it's actually my own personal commitment to make sure all our facilities that we host our meetings in are publicly accessible, accessible physically, and then we do everything we can to make sure that we are accessible from a language interpretation, whether it's capturing, whether it's sign language interpretation. And so we've been paying for all of that on our own without understanding that it was there was a service within the council budget. So interestingly enough, I've now been the chair of this committee for 2 years still, and it was not necessarily made known to me. So that's just one example of how myself as an individual was trying to access the system and provide services in the most accessible way, and still finding difficulty, not because the service didn't exist, but because it wasn't clearly communicated. So for those who are outside of City Hall, who are operating outside of the corporation, trying to access and provide voice to government, it is very, very difficult. So continue to push. I think this is a very good motion, and we should be adopting it. I think the motion is ready to be put on the screen. I ran the clock for as long as I could. Sorry, folks, you don't need to hear from me. I'm just trying to give the clerks more time. It's coming. Just a moment. A public service announcement then. So here's a, while we continue to operate here and get the motion onto the screen, we have just been advised that the copies of the fund guide are now made available here. They're sitting at in the meeting room at the very back. So on your way out, you can take a copy of it. Okay. Are we ready? Okay, so we're ready. So let's put that back on the screen, and I'm going to read it out loud because there's been some changes. I want to make sure everyone knows what's before us. Actually, Terry Lynn, would you like to read it because it's your motion?
No, actually. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm trying not to hear
I need new glasses, and that's
that's okay.
that's a serious
I'm trying not to
comment.
hear my own voice. Okay, anyways, here it goes. So this is Terry Lynn's amended motion, that the city increase the accessibility of public processes, consultation, and committee meetings by including communities using accessible alternative and visual languages, including audio description, as a way to communicate, and that such meetings progress to universal design for all people in the City of Toronto. Paragraph number 2, the city manager report to the Disabilities Action and Inclusion Advisory Committee every 6 months on the progress the city has made with respect to universal design for all meetings and the establishment of accessible minimum standards for participation in meetings.
Nice.
Okay,
I like that.
good. We want to make you happy. So everyone is in favor. Can you show your support? Okay, that's unanimous. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to now go to the last item, which is the item that I had asked for permission to introduce. And Martin, with apologies, and Yin, I'm going to read this out loud because it's a bit long. And because it needs to be read out loud. Okay. What's that? Yeah, and it's also on display. So this is the letter I first spoke to. So the background and summary is that on July the 12th, 2016, City Council passed Executive Item 16.37, requesting an across-the-board budget cut of 2.6%, net below the 2016 approved net operating budget for all city programs, agencies, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, accountability offices. Since then, I've heard from some of the agencies that help our most vulnerable citizens that an across-the-board budget cut would impact services and agencies that are vital to their well-being. This includes Toronto Public Library Board, has said that 2.6% cut would mean service reductions. The Toronto Public Health Board, who has said the 2.6 cut would stop low-income students from getting healthy snacks in our schools. And from the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, who has said a 2.6 cut would force the closure of some units. What ties these cuts together is their impact on our most vulnerable residents that include those with disabilities. It's not just our libraries and schools and housing, it will also include our parks, our recreational programming, our transit system, and our shelter system. A 2.6 budget cut will increase new challenges and burden residents who are already marginalized, including seniors, our newcomers, and those struggling with poverty. The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act 2005 requires us to remove barriers for individuals with physical or mental disabilities, be the barriers physical, architectural, informational, attitudinal, technological, or through a policy or a practice. A 2.6 budget cut would only serve to create barriers by denying our most vulnerable residents the critical city services they need. Therefore, I request that the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee put forth the following recommendation to the Executive Committee. Recommendation. Request the Executive Committee to convey on behalf of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee to City Council that a 2.6 cut to the City of Toronto budget would adversely impact individuals and families living with disabilities, and respectfully submitted by myself. Are there any questions? No? So this is an item that's before us. I'm just going to ask for a change. Can you get rid of that negative sign? Okay, so then we can move ahead to adopt. All those in favor, please? Show of support. Thank you. It is unanimous. Okay, so that almost concludes our business. I know that Yin, you'd like to make an announcement about December 3rd, Persons with Disabilities.
Yes. Several disability organizations, including Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, NEEDS, which is the National Educational Association of Disabled Students, Magnet, which is out of Ryerson, Canadian Hearing Society, and CNIB. We are working together to put on a small event at Metro Hall, room 308, 309, on the very day, which is Saturday, December 3rd, from 2 to 4, to mark the day, to celebrate the day, and we're focusing it on employment. So I would appreciate your support in not only coming out yourself, but inviting others to come out, persons with disabilities, but also your counselors, MPs, and of course, any employment agencies that would be interested to come and speak about how a network, basically networking. We have confirmations from Councillor Wong Tam to come to speak, but also Minister Tracy McCharles. She's the current Ontario Minister for Accessibility, so we're very happy about that. We're hoping to have a federal representative, and I've extended my invitation to Adam Bond. So basically, we would like our elected representatives to come and celebrate with us. So any help you can give in outreach would be welcome. So again, it's December 3rd, Saturday, Metro Hall, 2 to 4, on the 3rd floor, 308, 309.
Great, thank you very much. I look forward to attending that particular event, and everyone is welcome. Anything else? No?
Just thank you, Yin, so much for your work on it. Yeah, I've been seeing your Facebook posts.
Okay, great. So we're able to conclude our meeting then. All business has been dealt with. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to our staff.